When life feels unbearably heavy, most people shut down. They hide, they collapse, they wait for the weight to magically lift. But here's the truth: nothing changes until you decide to move, even if you're breaking inside. This video is for the days when you feel drained, exhausted, lost, yet a part of you still refuses to give up. Let's talk about how to keep going when everything feels impossibly heavy. Number one, acknowledge the weight instead of running from it. Most people try to outrun their pain. They distract themselves, bury their emotions, pretend everything is fine, and force a smile even when everything inside them is collapsing. But heaviness doesn't disappear just because you refuse to look at it. In fact, the more you run from something, the stronger it becomes. Acknowledging the weight you're carrying is not weakness. It's the first real moment of strength. It's the moment you stop lying to yourself. It's the moment you stop performing for others. And it's the moment you face the truth that something in your life feels overwhelming, and that feeling deserves your attention instead of your denial. When you're honest about where you stand, you reclaim control you didn't even realize you'd given away. There is a kind of damage that comes from pretending you're okay for too long. When you never give yourself the space to feel what you're feeling, you start to live as a version of yourself that doesn't match your reality. You become disconnected from your emotions, your needs, your body, and your inner voice. That disconnection eventually shows up as exhaustion, frustration, numbness, or sudden emotional breakdowns you can't explain. But these aren't random moments. They're signals your mind has been trying to send for months, maybe years, asking you to stop running and finally acknowledge the pressure you've been under. When you allow yourself to recognize that life has become heavy, you stop fighting your own truth, and that creates the internal alignment you need to start moving forward again. Acknowledging the weight also helps you understand its shape, its origin, and its impact on you. Maybe the heaviness is coming from burnout, from giving more than you receive, from constantly being the strong one, from carrying responsibilities that no one else sees. Maybe it's coming from loss, uncertainty, heartbreak, or the fear that you're falling behind while the world keeps moving. Or maybe it's coming from years of unresolved frustration, dreams you've delayed, or promises you made to yourself but never fulfilled. Whatever the source is, identifying it brings clarity, and clarity is what turns chaos into something you can eventually manage. You do not need to solve everything instantly, but acknowledging the truth lets you breathe for the first time in a long time. When you finally say to yourself, "This is heavy and I'm struggling," you open a door you've kept locked for too long. The door to self-understanding, the door to emotional honesty, the door to real healing, and you allow yourself to see the weight not as a failure but as a human experience you are allowed to feel without shame. Number two, detach emotion from action. There's a misunderstood belief that you must feel motivated, inspired, or emotionally stable before you take action. People wait for the perfect moment, the right mood, the spark of energy that suddenly pushes them forward. But life doesn't work like that. Most of the time, especially when everything feels heavy, your emotions will not align with what you need to do. You won't feel ready, you won't feel strong, you won't feel motivated. And that's exactly why detaching emotion from action becomes a crucial skill. It means refusing to let your emotional state dictate the direction of your life. It means understanding that your feelings are temporary, inconsistent, and impulsive, while your responsibilities, your goals, and your future require consistency, regardless of how you feel in the moment. You begin to see that your emotions are valuable signals, but they are not always trustworthy guides. When you rely on emotion-driven behavior, your actions become unpredictable. You might follow through when you're energized, but collapse on days when you feel drained. You might make promises to yourself that you abandon the instant discomfort shows up. This creates a life built on emotional instability rather than discipline. But when you detach emotion from action, you teach yourself to move even when your feelings resist. You separate what needs to be done from how you currently feel about doing it. You show up tired, anxious, uninspired, or frustrated, not because the process is easy, but because the next version of you depends on your ability to act independently of your emotional storms. Over time, you realize that taking action in a low state builds more strength than taking action when everything feels good. This mindset shifts the power dynamic inside you. Your emotions lose their control over your direction. Instead of letting fear, sadness, stress, or uncertainty freeze you, you learn to acknowledge those feelings without letting them paralyze you. You don't ignore them. You simply refuse to obey them. You learn to say, "Yes, I feel terrible today, but I will still move." And that decision becomes a subtle form of self-respect. It teaches you that you are capable of taking responsibility for your life, even when your internal world feels chaotic. The ability to act without emotional permission becomes a form of emotional discipline. And emotional discipline is what keeps your life from falling apart in difficult seasons. The truth is, your feelings often change after you take action, not before. You may start with resistance, heaviness, or dread, but once you move, clarity comes, energy rises, and momentum builds. You begin to realize that action reshapes emotion, not the other way around. Number three, simplify your life to regain control. When life feels unbearably heavy, it's rarely because of one single event. More often, it's the accumulation of responsibilities, thoughts, expectations, and pressures stacked on top of each other until you can no longer distinguish what actually matters from what's simply draining you. Most people don't realize how much unnecessary weight they're carrying because chaos slowly becomes familiar. You adapt to the noise, the overstimulation, the endless tasks, the constant notifications, the mental clutter, and you convince yourself this is just how life is supposed to feel. But heaviness often comes from complexity. Too many decisions, too many commitments, too many directions pulling you at once. Simplifying your life isn't about giving up. It's about clearing the path so you can finally breathe again and focus on the things that genuinely matter. Simplicity starts with honesty. It forces you to ask difficult questions. What am I doing out of obligation instead of intention? What habits drain me but add nothing to my life? Which people do I keep around out of guilt instead of genuine connection? What responsibilities have I taken on that don't belong to me? When you strip your life down to the essentials, you uncover how much of your daily struggle comes from things you never needed in the first place. You begin to see the invisible weight, the emotional labor, the mental load, the pressure to keep up with everything and everyone. Simplifying is not just about reducing tasks, it's about removing the things that manipulate your time, energy, and peace. It's about freeing yourself from commitments that suffocate your growth and expectations that were never yours to carry. Once you start cutting the noise, you regain a sense of control that felt impossible before. When your environment becomes calmer, your mind becomes clearer. When your priorities shrink to a manageable number, your confidence returns. When you're no longer juggling 20 things at once, you have the capacity to fully commit to one thing that actually moves your life forward. You stop living reactively, constantly putting out fires, and start living intentionally, making choices that align with your values and long-term vision. Simplifying your life doesn't make everything easy, but it makes the hard things manageable. It gives you the space to think, to breathe, to regroup, and to rebuild without feeling like you're drowning in endless obligations. In simplicity, you rediscover your own strength because clarity creates direction and direction creates momentum. Number four, use micro momentum, small wins that restore strength. When life becomes unbearably heavy, people often make the mistake of believing they need a massive breakthrough to get back on track. They wait for a dramatic change, a burst of motivation, or a sudden surge of clarity that will magically push them forward. But in reality, when you're overwhelmed, burned out, or emotionally drained, big goals feel impossible, and even small responsibilities feel intimidating. This is where micro momentum becomes a lifeline. It is the practice of creating tiny, manageable wins that slowly rebuild your strength, discipline, and sense of control. These small wins might seem insignificant at first, but they create the foundation for larger progress. When everything feels too heavy to carry, micro momentum gives you the ability to move without breaking further, allowing you to rebuild your life one small, deliberate action at a time. Micro momentum works because it bypasses the emotional resistance that comes with overwhelm. When you're exhausted or discouraged, your mind will fight against large tasks. The thought of fixing your entire life feels paralyzing, but the thought of doing one simple thing feels achievable. It can be as small as making your bed, cleaning your desk, drinking a glass of water, writing one sentence, or stepping outside for a 2-minute walk. These actions are not meant to solve your problems. They are meant to remind you that you are capable of movement. They reinforce the idea that progress doesn't always require intensity. Sometimes it only requires consistency. Every tiny action you complete sends a message to your brain. I'm still capable. I'm still moving. That message slowly rebuilds your self-belief, and self-belief is what fuels bigger change. The power of micro momentum lies in its ability to accumulate. One tiny win leads to another, and then another. Over time, these small actions begin to create a shift in your internal state. You start to feel more capable, more grounded, and more in control. You begin to trust yourself again because you're proving through small, consistent acts that you haven't given up. This slow rebuilding process is far more sustainable than a sudden burst of effort fueled by guilt or panic. Micromomentum respects your current capacity while still pushing you forward, and it creates the emotional and mental strength needed to take on larger tasks when the time is right. Eventually, what once felt impossible becomes manageable, not because life suddenly got easier, but because you rebuilt the internal foundation required to face it, one small step at a time. Number 5, rebuild meaning, not motivation. When life feels heavy, people often search for motivation as if it's the fuel that will rescue them from the darkness. They look for inspiration, uplifting videos, or emotional highs that temporarily spark energy. But motivation is unstable. It comes in waves, it fades without warning, and it disappears precisely when you need it most. Relying on motivation to pull you through difficult seasons sets you up for disappointment, because the moments that break you are the same moments where motivation refuses to show up. This is why rebuilding meaning becomes far more important than chasing motivation. Meaning doesn't vanish when you're exhausted. Meaning doesn't collapse when you're overwhelmed. Meaning anchors you, stabilizes you, and gives you a reason to move even when you feel emotionally detached from progress. It's the deeper why behind your actions, the thing that keeps you moving when nothing around you feels encouraging. Rebuilding meaning is about reconnecting with the parts of your life that matter enough to fight for, even when everything feels hopeless. You start by asking yourself questions you've been avoiding. What do I care about deeply? What kind of life do I refuse to settle for? Who am I trying to become? What would I regret not doing? These questions force you to confront your truth. Sometimes meaning comes from people you love, from dreams you've ignored, from responsibilities that depend on you, or from the simple belief that your future self deserves a better version of you. Meaning doesn't always feel inspiring. Sometimes it feels heavy, serious, or uncomfortable, but it has weight, and that weight gives you direction. When you reconnect to meaning, you stop drifting. You stop living day to day hoping for emotional sparks. You start moving with intention. Meaning also shifts the way you interpret struggle. Instead of seeing hardship as something that derails you, you begin to see it as part of the path you're meant to walk. When there's meaning behind your actions, you don't crumble every time you hit resistance. You endure it because you know what you're fighting for. You no longer collapse under emotional pressure because your actions are connected to something bigger than your mood. This is what makes meaning powerful. It builds resilience, and resilience sustains you in ways motivation never can. When motivation fails, and it will, meaning becomes the steady force that pulls you forward, giving strength to your steps, even when your heart feels tired and your mind feels overwhelmed. Number 6, practice ruthless self-support. There comes a point where you realize that no amount of external encouragement can replace the support you give yourself. People might care about you, but they can't live inside your mind. They can't fight your internal battles for you, and they can't constantly rescue you from your own thoughts. This is why ruthless self-support becomes essential, especially when life feels unbearably heavy. It means refusing to abandon yourself in your weakest moments. It means choosing to stand by yourself even when you feel ashamed, tired, overwhelmed, or disappointed in your own progress. Most people are incredibly skilled at criticizing themselves, judging themselves harshly, and punishing themselves for every mistake. Yet they struggle to offer even basic support or compassion to the person in the mirror. Practicing ruthless self-support means reversing that pattern. It means talking to yourself with the same seriousness, care, and urgency that you would offer someone you love who is falling apart. It's not about blind positivity or pretending you're doing great. It's about refusing to treat yourself like the enemy when you're the one who needs your understanding the most. Ruthless self-support begins with the way you speak to yourself in moments of failure or weakness. Instead of tearing yourself down, you learn to recognize that pain is not a personal flaw and struggle is not a reason to shame yourself. You start telling yourself what you genuinely need to hear instead of what your inner critic wants to repeat. You remind yourself that difficulty doesn't mean incapability, and slow progress doesn't mean defeat. You establish an internal voice that protects you instead of one that sabotages you. This shift changes the entire tone of your inner world. Your mind begins to feel less like hostile territory and more like a place where you can actually heal. Self support also means setting boundaries with yourself when necessary. It means stopping habits that destroy you, walking away from situations that drain you, and refusing to tolerate patterns that keep you stuck. You become someone who acts in your own best interest even when it's uncomfortable. It also means taking responsibility for your well being in ways that no one else can. You learn to rest when you need rest, to take action when action is required, and to rebuild discipline when you've slipped into avoidance. You stop outsourcing your emotional stability to other people's validation and begin developing an internal system built on self respect, self awareness, and quiet determination. Ruthless self support is not gentle or passive. It's intentional, structured, and sometimes painfully honest. It pushes you to do what keeps you grounded, protected, and capable of facing life again. It's the kind of support that becomes your backbone when everything else collapses, because you finally learn how to stand with yourself instead of waiting for someone else to save you. Life will press you down, and the weight will feel unbearable at times. But the strength to keep going has always been inside you. Treat yourself as someone worth protecting. Give yourself the care you've been withholding, and take one deliberate step forward at a time. Your resilience isn't built in comfort. It's forged in the moments you refuse to give up. Keep moving, keep choosing, and keep reclaiming your life, no matter how heavy it feels.